Have you wrestled with imposter syndrome, excessive and unsubstantiated self doubt coupled with an uncanny lack of confidence? I'm your host, Betty Danowitz. Listen as I interview highly successful individuals about their experience with this imposter syndrome and how it manifests itself in their lives in this If You Ask Betty podcast series dealing with imposter syndrome. Hi, Vanessa. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing
Good.
today? Good?
I'm good. Thank you.
Good? Good. Sometimes I say good enough.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
sometimes we're
Sometimes. Yeah.
here.
And speaking of good enough, tell us about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love to say I started making learning fun since 2009, but realistically, probably a little bit before, I was creating educational programming for communities I was in since I was in college, and I graduated during that lovely economic crash of 2008 thinking, what am I going to do? And luckily found like the one job that said, I will, we'll give you the skills that you need. It was like truly entry level. And that's when I started working as a corporate trainer for a software company, like truly fell in love with this craft ever since. And I did a lot of freelancing work along with my full-time job because I don't know how to not be busy. And I opened up Anchored Training in 2018 after 4 months after having my second daughter, a year and 2 weeks after my first. So I started my own company thinking, okay, that will give me more flexibility because I'll be my own boss, to be able to run my kids around. And joke's on me because I feel like I have less flexibility sometimes. But I actually wouldn't change it for the world. And last year, I purchased Kirkpatrick Partners. So Kirkpatrick Partners owns the IP to the Kirkpatrick model of evaluation. And I get to work with Wendy Kirkpatrick and Dr. Jim Kirkpatrick. And I have Dr. Don Kirkpatrick's overhead projector slides in my basement that he used to teach people like the model. Yeah, true artifacts. And it is wild because it's, whoever thought that little old me would be 6 degrees of separation of Kevin Bacon, I should say, to Don Kirkpatrick.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's quite a trinket. And I hate to I'm not trying to diminish it. It's just like, what a beautiful piece of history you have just sitting there. Hopefully you've got it. I can imagine you have it in a box and there's a light on it.
Oh, it is protected. It is. Oh, yeah. It is up right now. We are moving, but it shall get a permanent home very soon.
That is so cool. So what would you say are your biggest accomplishments in life and in work? You mentioned a few. I think, do they call that Irish twins when they're that close together? Is that what that is?
I just missed it. When it has to be under a year when they're Irish twins. So I just missed it. Although my aunt and uncle looked at me and they were like, wow, we thought that we had kids fast because ours are 13 months apart. And you just decided to squeak right in there. And I said, yes, I did. We squeaked right on in there.
So close.
That was hard. And then to open up a business. So then it's like a third infant at the same time.
Another child. Correct. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Less diapers, same amount of hands-on work.
Correct. But still some diapers sometimes. I would say though, it was really hard in the beginning. I wouldn't now, having gone through it, I wouldn't have changed it because I was able to get it done. And they're the best of friends and they're the best kids. So, and I don't just say that because I'm biased and they're mine. But maybe I'm a little biased. And
a little bit. That's okay.
Yeah, just a little. But it was just like I got the hard stuff done once. And then I was like, all right, we're done. Yeah. Although I said to my husband the other day, do you want to just try for one more? And he's like, you want to introduce more crazy into this circus? And I was like, it was just a moment. I'm getting to the age where I, might no longer be able to have
now
kids.
Or never. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So like, it was just a thought.
I shall retract it. We can let it pass by. That's fine.
Correct. Yeah.
So If I were to ask other people that question to tell me about Vanessa, what would other people say about you?
Yeah. This is always a hard one for me to answer. I will say from what I have heard, I hate hearing other people compliment me. Like it's literally, I'd rather do anything else. I'd rather go to the dentist.
Mm,
And a lot of people would say that I'm very inclusive as a human and ensure that everyone's voice is heard.
mm,
Everyone has a seat at my table. And I think they, just even this morning, my mom was, here come the tears. My mom was saying like, it's really great that the kids can see a mom like you, that loves them so hard, that works so hard to give them this life. That's kind of the beauty of working from home. My kids see how hard I work.
yeah.
So like I go somewhere and they don't really know what mommy does. Like they don't really know what I do. They think I make TikTok videos all day, which is fun. When I got my Mother's Day card this year, it
Yeah.
asked, right? Like, what does mommy do? Works from home. I was like, okay. But it's cool because they see it. And I think it's making an impression on them, that if you work hard, you get good, you can get good results and you get,
Yeah.
what you deserve. Right.
Absolutely.
And I think other people will say I'm a badass. And it's very uncomfortable for me to say it. But the idea that someone of my age, going and purchasing a company, and not just any company, right? Like a big brand in the industry, and having and being able to take that risk, like not everyone can do that.
No.
And I just decided to risk it all. Literally.
Yeah. Yeah. Literally. And anything else? Anything else that others would say? I mean, that's plenty. Like, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
If you don't have anything else, but before we move on, I just want to make sure you got a chance to share everything.
Yeah. I think that's good.
Yeah. What would
I
your
think
husband
that's
say?
enough.
Just out of curiosity.
Oh, depending on the day. Truly, the rock for our entire family. I am the full-time mom. I am the, a just as much of a equitable person in our partnership, right? We split things equally and all of that. So, I think he would say that, and I think that he would honestly say that like the core of our family, I think, is me.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, what has been your experience with imposter syndrome?
It is different for me depending on the situation I'm facing, right? So it will manifest differently for me. However, it is something that I grapple with daily. Some days, not a big deal. Other days, it hits me really hard. And depending on who I'm around, right? So like, for example, next week we'll be at the ATD conference. I will have
Yeah.
so much imposter syndrome. I'm going to be around people like you. And I'm like, me next to Betty, like, who is this girl? I'm presenting with Wendy Kirkpatrick on the Kirkpatrick model. Like that's, and I'm with Nicole and Robin and, Myra, and like, Myra, I'm presenting next to Myra, me. So I will feel a lot of it next week. Although it may not look like it, when I'm out in public spaces, inside I'm grappling with so much imposter syndrome. So I think that's how that shows up for me. It's something that I've also come to terms that I may never, that I don't even think I think it's always going to be there in some way, shape, or form, right? And it's not a bad thing either to have. I think it's bad, and if you let it run your life,
Yes.
because sometimes it'll like help you check yourself, be like, okay, and it reminds you that you're human, and it makes me more human for others. to be like, I struggle with this too. You're not alone. You know what I mean? It just,
Yeah.
so I think if you can understand how to navigate it properly, it doesn't have to be a terrible thing that completely debilitates you. It's just something that I think high performing people really, really have to deal with.
Yeah. 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 So when you're having an episode of imposter syndrome, right? So you mentioned you're anticipating it coming up. You've surely felt it at some point this week, making you, by the way, just like the rest of us, we're right there with you. I was having
Yeah.
it terrible yesterday for like hours before I did a session on imposter syndrome. Talk about an inception type of moment,
Right.
like when you're having imposter syndrome about talking about imposter syndrome. Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a
But
whole, it's
so
a whole
it's a
circle.
that's the whole thing. So when you're having in this episode, how does it manifest itself? So like for some people, it turns into perfectionism or overachieving or self-sabotage, masking. I've heard a lot of people talk about how they have to be somebody else because they just can't deal with it. What do you experience? What happens?
Yeah. I think that when I'm in a public space, it's more of the masking. So like my husband will ask, he's like, how do you just like get up there and speak? And I'm like, honestly, you know how like Beyonce has Sasha Fierce? I feel like I do that, right? I don't have a name for her. I just recognize where I'm at. This is a
Mm-hmm.
performance, and I am, I'm going to show up and give the people what they came for. And so there's a lot of masking when it comes to public speaking so that I
Mm-hmm.
can get through it. And I put that imposter syndrome in a box and I put it behind stage. When it comes to things that are more around like work, like actually creating things or preparing for a presentation, like the actual development of it, it'll be a lot of overachieving. I think right now it's a lot of overachieving, having a lot of things like in my plate, under my belt so that no one can sit here and say like, where did you come from? What makes you able to like own, instructional design agency, Kirkpatrick Partners, whatever. So I'm always trying to do the most to ensure that my worth is proven. Perfectionism will come sometimes, not as often. It's really more overachieving and masking for me. And then I will self-sabotage. It's more procrastination or just like freezing and not being able to like, so for example, like in certain areas, like I just had this conversation, so funny. Filling out proposals.
Mm-hmm.
I got a lot of imposter syndrome when I put a price.
Ooh.
And I put that
I felt
investment.
that. Oh, I felt it. It's so hard to put a price. Yes. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, yeah, absolutely.
I had a visceral reaction to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Putting a price and saying, this is what it's worth. And you're like, well, why would they pay? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that is really hard. So I've actually I've had some like more RFPs, right? Non-specific proposals. Those I will always get done if you come to me and you want a price. Like I'll give it to you.
Sure.
But when it comes to like RFPs, I find and things like that, I will pause and be like, ooh, I don't know if I'm like 100% able to do that or qualified enough or whatever the case may be. Or they probably have someone. So like, I'm just not, I'm going to fill it out, but I'm going to do it tomorrow. I'm going to do it tomorrow. Next thing I know, the deadline's passed. And it reminds me of when I was looking for a job, right? And I look at the qualifications and I'm like, oh, I'm not 100% qualified. I can't apply to that. And I'm sure I missed a lot of really good opportunities because I did not believe in the abilities I had.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the freezing a little bit more? So you had an example like with the RFPs. So I love the way you described it as freezing because it is a procrastination, but it's like a paralysis because it's not that you're putting it off. It's that you actually can't do it right now.
Yeah.
And that's what happens with me a lot is I can't do it right now. Like I literally can't. I feel like I'm not in the right mindset. I'll make every excuse under the book. I cannot actually do it. Do you have anything like physical that happens when you're going through a moment like that? Maybe it's
Yeah.
not just the freezing, but I'm thinking with the freezing, if we're as alike as I think we are, there's something physical that's
Yeah.
happening.
I physically feel like there's something on my chest and my arms can't move.
Mm-hmm.
So like, we're sitting here typing all day, right? I'm like, I physically can't get anything out of my fingertips to start
Yeah.
writing this proposal. I've actually, it's been so bad that I've had to put money towards it. I hired someone to help me write proposals
To
because I'm
get
like,
over
I had to figure out a way to get over it, and it has to be someone else does that part. I also don't have enough time in the day to
Sure.
put in that sort of amount of work that an RFP takes, especially the ones we're going after, like on the federal government side and things like that. And that they want a lot of information. So I've had to delegate that. And because I knew that that was the only way I was going to get over my paralysis. That being said, it's still showing up right now because they need some information from me. And I cannot for the life of me just take the document and send it to them.
Yeah.
And it literally, the information is sitting on my desktop and I'm just like, I can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel you. So when you think about, the way that it manifests itself, imposter syndrome, you talked about a lot of the things: perfectionism, overachieving, self-sabotage, freezing. I love that new term. Are there other contributing factors? So like in previous episodes, we've talked about triggers, right? So things like, having new expectations, or being new at a job, or being isolated from others. These are all triggers for imposter syndrome. But is there something else about you that makes imposter syndrome happen or heightens its impact?
I think for some of it, it's trauma from not my childhood, but like my young adulthood around that, economic crash. We went through a lot. My family is a real estate family. My dad's a real estate attorney. We went through a lot during that time. And I am so afraid of making a bad decision. Like I'm hyper aware as what's happening right now in our economy, because I've been through such a dip financially, and seeing my parents go through that, like the idea of something happening to my family. Like I'm so hyper aware of trying to be the most and do the most to avoid any of those things. So trauma for me plays a huge trigger. And I think about that time in my life almost daily.
Yeah.
I should go to therapy about it, but here we are.
Well, this is kind of like therapy.
A little bit. Yeah.
Not long term though. I mean, we can keep talking if you want, but we're not going to record every conversation. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot about the generation right now that's graduating college, and they graduated in 2020. My daughter just graduated from college. She graduated high school in 2020, and it's hard. This was her first ever true graduation experience, like inside, getting to do all the things, shaking the hands, taking the pictures. Like she actually had a graduation ceremony outside. They couldn't shake hands. There was just, she just missed out on a lot of the pomp, circumstance, ceremony that happens. But then I think about what's their expectation now for work, right? As they go out and they try to find a job. And we're still trying to figure it out as a society. Do people work from home, or do they work in the office, or is it a little bit of both? And like, how do we do that? And they're like, I don't know, we've always only worked from home, so we don't really know how to help you. So it's and then I feel that.
Yeah. And for her, right, it might also be harder to find a job, right? Because there's so much trepidation out there in the market of hiring. And then when you put your resume out there, right, and you think like, okay, I'm qualified for this, and then you're not hearing back, or you're getting rejections, you start to think like, okay, is it me? Right. We do have to do that reflection.
Sure.
And I think it triggers a lot of imposter syndrome. And then you go on later, you get your job, and you go on later, like later on in the years, and you're applying to another, set of jobs, and your brain has this expectation it's going to take you a while.
It's going to
You're
take
not
a
gonna
while.
be totally calm. Yeah. And that cycle just perpetuates over and over and over
It does.
again.
It does. Anything else that you think is a contributing factor?
I think honestly, which is might sound weird coming from me, the social medias. Everyone's posting their everyone's posting their highlight reel. And there's not enough vulnerability as to how hard it takes to get there, right? And like how many struggles there are in the back, like behind everything, right? Like a lot of I got this a lot. So when I purchased KP, my dad, my lawyer, broke his hip in Florida and lost the use of his hands.
Oh my goodness.
We had a heck of a time trying to get him home after a month. And this is like, I'm literally in closing. Like, so we got him home about 2 weeks before I closed. At one point when we finally got him home, I had him and my husband in the hospital. The day my dad's supposed to have, we figured out he had spinal cord compression. So we had to have surgery. So that day or the day before, I had to admit my husband to the hospital. And so I was like, you're going to the same hospital as my dad. Because if I have to run between 2 rooms, I'm not running between 2 hospitals. I'm running between 2 floors, which actually was the same floor they ended up on. I was hoping it'd be right next to each other. Well, I was hoping it was right next to each other because I was going to do the cans with the string in the middle.
Of course, that would be super fun. Oh, bummer.
Yeah. Actually, my husband, because he could walk, whenever they couldn't find him in his room, they were like, you have to go to patient in 418. It's his father-in-law. And he's probably in there, which is super fun for the doctors. But anywho, I remember Wendy saying to me, she knew everything that was happening. And she was like, you would never know that your entire world is breaking apart and everything's moving and everything's going. And I said, that's right. I am a duck. On the outside, I will look calm and collected. And underneath, those legs are going. And they are not stopping. And I think, well, that's business, right? Like, you know, I can't always have a breakdown because I have a team that looks to me and I am their leader and I'm going to move forward. And if I freak out about things, they're really going to freak out. So I don't allow them to do that. And I also think that perpetuates this idea that success is just like, it just happens. And it really doesn't, right? And you have these moments. And so I think that if we could show people how truly hard it is to do this work, to build a business, right? People would really see the behind the scenes. I think there's so many people out there selling the dream. Like, you could wake up tomorrow and have this instructional design career and make 6 figures. And it's like, no, you can't. Unless you're like highly, highly, highly skilled and like killer out the gate.
But even if you are, there's so many other steps to just being skilled. Yeah.
Right. And so not having that, you know, the ability to see really that vulnerability, no one's really being as vulnerable. I try to do it every once in a while. I think actually Nicole Papiano Lugera is probably the best at it that I've seen. Yeah. She has posted some really, 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 really vulnerable things. And I admire her immensely for being so vulnerable. Yeah, I have a vision. I would love to film every single day. And I would love to have a reality show. Yeah. Because I want people to see, like, first of all, like some things that happened to me are just you have to film this. Like I was having a team meeting and I had to go catch my dog's pee in a cup because we thought he had a UTI. And I'm like, why is nobody filming me right now? Like, this is pure gold.
That's gold. That is, people will watch that shit. Yes, they will.
Correct. Correct. In an ugly Christmas sweater, to be clear. So yes. Right. Absolutely. But also just to see like all the things that happen day in and day out, like what it truly takes. I would love to see for people to see more of that.
Yeah. You know, I'm not sure if you're aware, but one of the things that you described, the whole when your dad and your husband were both in the hospital and like you have to keep it together because you can't fall apart because then your team will fall
Mm-mm.
apart. And yeah, that's like being a super person. And it's
Oh yeah.
actually one way that imposter syndrome manifests itself. So it's
Mm-hmm.
that whole, I'm just using this as a teaching moment. I figured you probably
Yeah.
already knew this, but like it's that whole, I can't let anything go wrong. So it's like a
Mm-hmm.
combination of perfectionism, overachieving, you're basically holding on to everything and everyone to get them over
Mm-hmm.
the next line until they can stand on their own again. And that's because, why is that? Why do you think that is
Ooh, for me,
for
it
you?
again goes back to that trauma
Mm-hmm.
of I want to make sure everyone is safe and secure. And I want to be the one to help provide that.
To help provide
Um,
safety and security.
and that is
What
so
happens if you
important to
don't?
me.
What happens? This is where we're kind of crossing to therapy. What
Mm-hmm.
happens if you don't?
um, ooh, I think for me, some of it, like when it comes to like work, not like as much family,
Mm-hmm.
I have this fear if I don't keep it all the balls together, right? And I don't bring the project along, like, are we going to be found out? We do good
Oh,
work. So I'm like, am I going to be found out that I'm not as good as I say that we are? I know that
okay.
we are, but and slips happen, right? Like things happen
Oh yeah, mistakes happen, but the moment they
always.
happen, we're like, oh, maybe I'm
Was
not
that
what I think I am.
detrimental? Exactly. And
Yeah.
from a work perspective, that's how I get. From a family perspective, again, I want to be that rock for them and that safety and security. I mean, I'm doing it right now,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
flying everywhere, managing two businesses, managing the sale of my home, managing the purchase of another home, and trying to set up movers and hosting a whole conference in a couple of weeks. Like, I just, I'm not going to be able to, I don't break down right now. I do,
Yeah.
actually, to be clear. I had to break down
Yeah.
earlier today. But we got to keep going.
You got to keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really interesting. I'm really grateful that you shared the story because I think a lot of folks will really resonate with some of the words you've said, especially like, what if we're found out?
Mm-hmm.
Even though there is a plethora, I haven't gotten to use that word in a long time, a plethora of
Mm-hmm.
evidence that indicates that you are successful because you know what you're doing. If we make a mistake, will people think or will they find out that we have no idea what we're doing?
Mm-hmm.
Even though that's really not true, but that's how we feel.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so much, that's why I really do advocate for others. And it's hard for me to practice this, but I advocate for keeping those like, thank you so much, Vanessa, like emails, you were amazing. It was so great to work with you. Like all those happy notes, right? And those kudos. And like today I just got a LinkedIn message of someone who really enjoyed my training mag presentation, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
I screenshotted it and like,
Keep that.
I'm such a, yes, like you have to keep
Mm-hmm.
those things because it is so much easier for your brain because it's trying to keep you safe, right?
Yeah.
Your brain wants to inherently keep you safe. And so it is so easier for you to go back to every single time you failed, right? And it wants to prevent you from doing that again. As if it's
Yes.
saying, when I took the risk, here were all the rewards. And it's harder for me to remember those
Mm-hmm.
and remember the good times. That's why today, like with my team member, I was like, I know I am going through hell right now, and I'm about to get to my next step, my next breakthrough. The last time I went through this much hell, I was about to sign on the dotted line for Kirkpatrick Partners. I know this.
Yeah.
And I know that's where we're at. I know it's like the next stage of growth for us. And man, sometimes I wish I could just snap my fingers and make it a little bit easier because
Yeah.
it really does rock your confidence big time.
It does. It really does. All right. I've got one more question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you want to be part of this imposter syndrome project?
Well, because you asked and you're amazing and I love you,
Thank you.
obviously. And like whatever you ask, I'm like, okay. Kidney? Sure. I notice I didn't say liver. You don't want this one.
No. Yeah.
Especially after this move. No, I like I said, I think that we need to talk about it more. We need to normalize the fact that what you are seeing, even on my social media, is a highlight reel,
Absolutely.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And my LinkedIn may not always be the appropriate place to be totally open and honest and vulnerable because I've got like clients and potential clients following me, right?
Yeah.
But I want to be part of those places where I think that it does make more sense and it is appropriate. And I want to take that first step myself to help to normalize this.
Mm-hmm. And I'm so grateful that you did. Thank you for being so vulnerable and open, Vanessa Alzate, and thanks for sharing your experience with us. And thanks to the listeners, I hope you'll continue this series and hear more stories about dealing with imposter syndrome. So many amazing people deal with this every single day, and sharing their story helps them and you feel less alone. So be sure to follow If You Ask Betty on LinkedIn and YouTube for more episodes and resources. Oh, and tell your friends about it. Hit that share button so they also know that they are not alone. Peace out.